This is definitely a sing-along. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. I've roamed and rambled, I've followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts, and all around me a voice was calling. It said, this land was made for you and me. Here we go. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. One last time. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
So I'd like to invite the young folks of all ages to come forward. The young at heart, you're always welcome. I need to move up so I can see all of you. There we go. Okay. Hi, friends. This is the last time I'm going to say that to you all, so I'm going to say it again. The young at heart are always welcome. I picked this story very, very carefully for you all. 4.5 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, however long it is ago that I landed here, 4.5 years, you had at the time a minister, Reverend Libby Smith. Most of you would remember her, and she gave me this story very early on and said it had a lesson in it for me and that I should remember that during my time with you. And then when she left us at the end of the year, on her last day, we read this story for her. So it's a special story for me because she was right, there is a lesson in it, and it was a lesson that I took to heart very much. It's something that I feel like I've learned from you all while I've been here. But also today is a special day for this congregation. It's a day that we all take a little time to think about who we are and why we're important to each other and how we want to keep being important to each other going forward. And I think that when we have those conversations, sometimes we get so stuck on what we wish we could be and what we want to do better and what we're not doing right, that we forget to think about all the flowers we've watered along the way. So that's why I picked this story, all of those reasons. There was a water bearer in India whose job was to carry 2 large pots, each hung on the end of a pole, that he carried across his neck. And one of the pots had a crack in it. And at the end of the long walk from the stream on the master's house, the one pot arrived full, and the cracked pot arrived only half full. For 2 years this went on every day, with the bearer delivering 1.5 pots of water to his master's house. Of course, the perfect pot was very proud of his accomplishments. He was perfect for the reason for which he'd been made. But that cracked pot sometimes felt ashamed of its own imperfections and felt miserable that it was only able to accomplish half what the other pot could do. After 2 years of what it perceived as its failure, the cracked pot spoke to the water bearer one day during their walk and it said to the water bearer, "I feel ashamed of myself, and I want to apologize to you." "Why?" asked the bearer. "What on earth could you possibly have to be ashamed of?" "Well, I've been able this whole past 2 years to deliver only half my load because this crack in my side causes the water to leak out all the way back down the path to the master's house. Because of my flaws, you have to do all this extra work to get enough water, and you don't get full value from what I bring to you," the pot said. And the water bearer felt sorry for the cracked pot, and in his compassion, this is what he said. "As we return to the master's house along the path, I want you to notice the beautiful flowers growing alongside the path." And indeed, as they went up the hill, the old crackpot took notice of the sun warming beautiful wild flowers all along his side of the path. And it cheered him up some, that's sure. But at the end of the trail, it still felt sad because it had, of course, again leaked out half of its load. And so again the pot apologized to the bearer for its failure. And the bearer said to the pot, "Didn't you notice there are only flowers on your side of the path and not on the other side of the path? That's because I've always known about your crack. And so as we walked along the path, I dropped seeds on that side of the path, knowing that as we walked along the path, you would water those seeds for me. For 2 years, I've been able to pick beautiful flowers to put on the master's table. Without you and without your crack, that would never have been possible. We all have our own unique flaws. We're all cracked pots. In the great web of life, nothing goes to waste. Don't be afraid of your flaws. Acknowledge them. And you too can be the cause of beauty in the world. Know that in our weakness, we can find strength. So that's my story. Thank you.
This is a song by My Morning Jacket. But the chorus is pretty simple and easy, so if you feel like singing along when we get there. It matters to me. Took a long time to get here. If it would have been easy, I would not have cared. Like a tropical forest, like a cop on the beat. When all is in order, you get lost in the heat. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, wonderful the way I feel. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, ooh, wonderful the way I feel. That's a chorus if you want to try it. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, wonderful the way I feel. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, ooh, wonderful the way I feel. Doesn't matter to me. I could take it or leave it. I can learn from way back when and still live right now. With the sun on my shoulder and the wind on my back, I will never grow older, at least not in my mind. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, wonderful the way I feel. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, ooh, wonderful the way I feel. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, wonderful the way I feel. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, ooh, wonderful the way I feel. I'm going where there ain't no fear. I'm going where the Spirit is near. I'm going where the living is easy and the people are kind, a new state of mind. I'm going where there ain't no police. I'm going where there ain't no disease. I'm going where there ain't no need to escape from what is, only spirits at ease. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, wonderful the way I feel. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, ooh, wonderful the way I feel. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, wonderful the way I feel. I feel so wonderful, wonderful, wonderful the way I feel.
Good morning. So do we feel wonderful or what? The reading today is taken from a speech that was given by Dr. Diana Eck at the installation of Galen Gingrich as the senior minister of All Souls Church in New York. Anybody been to All Souls in New York? Well, if you've never been, you should. Next time you're in Manhattan, it's a wonderful church, and they do a lot of great stuff. Dr. Eck is a professor of comparative religion at Harvard, and this is what she said about our church. If there was a time that we need to spin out a new fabric of belonging and a wider sense of we for the human community, it is certainly now. Developing a consciousness of our growing religious interrelatedness, developing a moral compass that will give us guidance in the years ahead, these are certainly among the most important tasks of our time. You, meaning us, have a theological orientation toward the oneness and mystery of God that is essential for the world of religious difference in which we live. You are, in my estimation, the church of the new millennium. In this era, Unitarian Universalism is not the lowest common denominator, but the highest common calling. In a world divided by race and by religion and theology, the very presence of a church like this, committed to the oneness of God, the love of neighbor, and the service to humanity, is a beacon. The Unitarian theology, and yes, you have one, does not reduce the mystery of the divine to the transcendent, but amplifies it, broadens it, and includes the investigation of many, many ways in which the divine is known and yet unknown. You do have a mission. The world is in need of your theology.
There's a land that I see where the children are free, and I say it ain't far to this land from where we are. Take my hand, come with me where the children are free. Come with me, take my hand, and we'll run to a land where the river runs free, to a land through the green country, to a land to a shining sea. You and me are free to be, you and me. I see a land bright and clear, and the time's coming near when we'll live in this land, you and me, hand in hand. Take my hand, come along, lend your voice to my song. Come along, take my hand, sing this song. For a land where the river runs free, for a land through the green country, for a land to a shining sea, for a land where the horses run free, and you and me are free to be, you and me are free to be, you and me are free to be, you and me.
In the reading today, religion scholar Diana Eck said that the Unitarian Universalism Church is the church of the new millennium. Now, that's a pretty bold statement for any church, but especially for we Unitarian Universalists, because we're pretty laid back about our own denomination. But just in case you got a swelled head at the idea of being the church of the new millennium, let me give you a few sobering statistics. There are about 9 times more Roman Catholics in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia than there are Unitarians in the world. And since 1968, membership in the entire world of Unitarian Universalism has gone down from a high of 177,000 to currently 156,000. And there are also 92 fewer UU churches than there were in 1968, and 57,000 fewer kids in RE. So it wasn't surprising that when Galen Gingrich spoke at the General Assembly in Charlotte in 2011, on the 50th anniversary of the merger of the Unitarians and the Universalists, that he not only talked about what we needed to do to be the church of the new millennium and why we needed to be the church of the new millennium, but also what we needed to do just to survive. Because if things keep going the way they are, we may not be around in the next millennium. Now, you may not care whether or not we are the church of the new millennium, but I'm sure all of us here would like our church to survive. And it turns out the reasons why and the reasons how are pretty much the same. One reason is that we need to be a counterweight, like many other organizations, to the increasing influence of the religious and political right, which these days seem to be one and the same. We've made a lot of progress in the last 50 years in a lot of areas, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, and so forth. But many of those rights, many of those gains that have been made are being chipped away almost daily by the right. And even voting rights that we all sort of took for granted are being chipped away at. And all this happened even before the pumpkin-haired tweeter-in-chief became president. The second reason we need to be the church of the new millennium is that if we really believe in our 7 principles, it behooves us to grow and become a more powerful force to put those into practice and to see that those aspects of social justice and so forth become a reality. If we remain a minuscule denomination, how much progress can we make in ensuring justice and equity, or the use of the democratic process, or promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every human being? Unfortunately, I have discovered often painfully that UUs are often perfectly content to remain a small denomination. When I took over a moribund membership committee in, I guess it was about 2004, I remember my predecessor trying to entice people to join the committee by saying, "We don't have many meetings." That was her inducement. So I put together a committee that wasn't concerned about too many meetings. We actually only had a meeting a month, so that wasn't too bad. And our committee instituted just some very basic common sense reforms, like giving job descriptions to everybody on the committee, or following each visitor to see if they were becoming comfortable with the church and if they were being connected with people who had similar interests. Like if somebody expressed an interest in the choir, we made sure they got connected with that. Or somebody expressed an interest in the caring committee, we made sure they got in contact with them. And as a result of these reforms, membership increased for the first time in a decade. And it continued to increase even after I left the committee. But gradually over the years, a lot of those reforms that were made were either minimized or abandoned entirely. So it's not surprising that the church declined in population, membership, in the last year or two. Now, a lot of people give the excuse of, well, we're only volunteers. Well, that's true. We are only volunteers, but so were the members of my committee. So are the members of any committee that does good work. And what would happen to the social movements like the civil rights movement if people like, well, all the leaders of the civil rights movement, Andrew Young and Harry Belafonte and Jesse Jackson, said, well, you know, we're only volunteers. The third reason we need to be the church of the new millennium is that we need to address the needs of people today who are largely unchurched. You've probably read that more and more people do not consider themselves affiliated with a particular denomination. I think that figure is somewhere around 30% these days. And many of those people may not be connected with a religion, but they're still looking for a life of meaning and purpose. And I think we UUs are uniquely qualified to address those questions that people have, because that's who we are. We live a life of meaning and purpose. We don't pay fealty to dogma or to a specific book or a specific individual. We say, this is the way to live a life of meaning and purpose. Come join us. So that's the why. That's the easy part. Now the hard part, the how. One of the ways is to redefine God, to make it more embraceable by people who are not UUs. Galen Gingrich, in his book, God Revised. That isn't a Unitarian title. I don't know what is. Anybody read this? I know Jennifer said she has. Well, he says, UUs are dismissive of God and skeptical of religion. So why do we need to redefine God? Why do we have to even to address the issue of God? And I say this as an atheist. Well, the reason is that 75% of Americans still believe in a God of some kind. Now, I know God is the problem for many UUs. The American Religious Identification Survey several years ago asked people in all denominations, do you agree or disagree that God exists? 20% of Unitarians refused to answer the question. The survey said, this may indicate some doubt. You think? Now, we're less dogmatic about God, and I would think that most UUs, even though I'm an atheist over here, and I'm sure there are true believers over here, I think most UUs are somewhere in the middle of that continuum. The problem is that most non-UUs are not comfortable with a God as optional concept. We embrace science and logic, sometimes almost to a fault. And as Gingrich said, the problem with science and logic is that it doesn't establish an emotional connection with people. As he put it, you can't say evolution loves you or that gravity believes in you. Which is why he suggested in his book a new definition of God, one that people could take personally. And this is his definition. God is the experience of being connected to all that is present, as well as all that is past, and all that is possible. Now, even for an atheist like myself, that makes sense. But it still doesn't get as personal as the Christian view of Jesus as your personal Savior. It doesn't get more personal than that. One reason why Christianity had been so popular over the years, even though Christian denominations like Catholicism are losing people, is that people like St. Paul, who for all practical purposes really created Christianity, sold the idea that if you believed in Jesus as your personal Savior, you would be comforted in this life and be catapulted into the next. Now, that kind of an argument falls on deaf ears with Unitarians, to only 20% of whom believe in heaven, and only 10% believe in hell. I think that's the universalist part of us that kind of kicks up the percentage. Even Gingrich said that Jesus as Son of God was a brilliant conceit, wrong-headed but brilliant, and well packaged for individual conscription. That's another way of saying that the Christians did a great job of marketing, something that we can learn from. Even though, one of the ironies, and I was talking to some guys earlier today about this, that one of the ironies of Christianity and Unitarian Universalism is that even though we don't believe in the divinity of Jesus, what we live and how we live our lives is more in keeping with what Jesus said and preached than what a lot of Christians do. I actually saw a statistic recently that said that Donald Trump got a higher percentage of the Christian evangelical vote than George W. Bush, who was himself an evangelical Christian. So what does that tell you? Now, I'm not saying that we need to define God the way Jews do or Christians or Muslims do. Nor should we be intimidated when somebody asks us, do you believe in God? What I suggest is you carry on one of these things. Anybody have one of these? It's a little packet that tells you what the 6 sources of inspiration and the 7 principles are. So if somebody says you believe in God, read this to them. Yeah, we believe in a God who recognizes the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We believe in a God who demands justice, equity, and compassion. A God who encourages us to accept one another and encourages spiritual growth in our congregations. A God who allows the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. a God who promotes the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and society, a God whose goal is that of world peace, liberty, and justice for all, a God who asks us to respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. That is our God. When somebody asks you what our God is, tell them that's our God. And then say, what do you got? You know, we joke about trying to define what we believe in, you know, the famous elevator speech. And usually what happens is we wind up fumbling around trying to put together something that's coherent in 30 seconds or less. And we wind up telling people more about what we don't believe in than what we do believe in. And the reality is that we believe in a lot of things that are covered by those 7 principles. Those 7 principles cover a lot of territory, and we all believe in them. And we all believe in the major issues of the day. We may put our personal spin on them, but down deep, there's commonality, if not unanimity, on the major issues of today in our church. Now, if you asked somebody who was a Christian or a Muslim and said, what do you believe in? Well, a Christian might say, well, I believe in Jesus, or I believe in the strict word of the Bible. And you should respond by saying, and do you believe in stoning adulterers? Because that's in the Bible. And so is slavery and murder and a lot of human sacrifice. By the way, do you keep kosher? That's Leviticus, by the way. That's the one they always use to condemn gays and lesbians. And if you believe in what Jesus said about feeding the hungry and the poor, do you support cutting food stamps? Not to mention the ban on Muslims that we have just experienced. There's more commonality in what we believe in than we realize. It's the little things that we disagree about. Like, should we put the announcements in before the service or after the service? Should we have chairs or pews? The big argument in my former church was where to put the organ. The organ used to be in the front, and then there was a big controversy when they moved it to the back. And even after the decision, stop me if you think this sounds familiar, even after the decision, for years, people kept talking about, why did we move the organ to the back? For UU's, religion is a way of life, not a subservience to dogma or ancient and outdated ancient revelations. The thing that I love about Unitarian Universalism is that while we believe in many of the same things together, we are free to put our personal spin on them. So you may believe in economic justice, for example, but you may disagree with one another as to how to get to that point. But the basic thing about whether or not that's a right or an important issue isn't in question. We also, of course, have a remarkable history. Unitarians, Universalists were in the forefront of many of the social movements of the 19th and 20th centuries. The first woman of a major denomination to be a minister was a Universalist. There was even the inventor of the internet was a Unitarian. Yeah, I know you thought it was Al Gore. Another distinction is how we view the world. Now, mainstream religions take these ancient texts and revelations, many of which have good and important things to say, but many of which were written thousands of years ago by people who just didn't know what the heck was going on in the world. I mean, people didn't know why the sun came up in the morning 5,000 years ago. And so, by using those ancient texts and revelations exclusively, they're trying to learn how to live today's life using those alone. And a lot of times it doesn't fit, which is why so many preachers, televangelists especially, are telling people this is what the Bible means, because most of them can't figure it out. We, on the other hand, look at the world today and we see this is the world today. How can I live a life of meaning and purpose? What kind of tools do I need? So we take from the Bible. We take from the Quran. We take from even things that aren't even considered religious. To me, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are sacred documents. According to Gingrich, those texts, whichever they may be, help us to awaken our sense of the sacred and transform our world and ourselves, which is the purpose of religion. I grew up as a Roman Catholic, and for the first 18 or 20 years of my life, I don't ever recall being transformed or inspired as a Roman Catholic. But I can say that I have been transformed and inspired on a number of occasions as a Unitarian Universalist. And the ironic thing is, despite that, I feel more free from religion, that is to say, from the constraints of religion, than I ever have. I mean, I've got, 4 books on my nightstand, 3 of which are religious. And The Evolution of God, History of Buddha, and a third one I can't remember. And yet, I don't feel constrained by religion whatsoever. I'm more interested in it than I ever was, but I'm not constrained by it. And I think that's a tough combination to beat. And it's why I think Diana Eck was onto something. Maybe so. Amen and thank you.